Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in the small village of Mvezo in Umtata, which lay on the banks of the Mbashe River. Mandela grew up in the village of Kunu with his mother and two sisters. His childhood there was dominated by Tembu customs and traditions, and he often tended to herds as a cattle boy and spent the majority of his time playing outside along with the other boys. When Mandela was about 7 years old, he was enrolled in the local Methodist school, where his teacher gave him the English forename of Nelson. And when he was only 9 years old, his father passed away due to an unknown illness. Mandela was then entrusted to the guardianship of the Thembu regent, Chief Jongintaba, at Mkhekezweni, where they treated him as their own child. Mandela would not see his mother again for years. After completing his BA in 1943, Mandela began studying law at the University of Witwatersrand, where he was the only native African student. Simultaneously, he also began his 3-year articles at Witkin, Sidelsky, and Eidelman. While studying at the university, Mandela met and befriended students from different backgrounds, including liberal European, Indian, and Jewish students. He also became increasingly aware of the racial inequality existing in South Africa. He saw how non-whites were oppressed and subjugated, and segregation based on race was widespread. This sudden awareness prompted him to join the African National Congress to fight for the rights of the disenfranchised. In the 1948 general election, in which only whites were allowed to vote, the openly racist Afrikaner Party, known as the Nationalist Party, came into power. The Nationalist Party immediately expanded and enacted the apartheid legislation, thereby officially formalizing it in law. This legislation legally institutionalized systematic racial discrimination in South Africa, where the whites dominated over the people of other races. Nelson Mandela and his comrades guided the African National Congress toward a more radical and revolutionary path, advocating boycotts, strikes, and other direct action strategies against the apartheid government. The Defiance Campaign was launched on 26 June 1952. All across South Africa, the masses performed acts of defiance and civil disobedience to provoke the authorities to arrest them and put them in jail. The significance of the Defiance Campaign lies in the fact that it was the first large-scale, countrywide, multi-racial political mobilization against apartheid laws. The ANC and the Pan-Africanist Congress initiated an anti-pass campaign in early 1960. They asked the masses to burn their passes that they were legally obliged to carry along with them at all times. The ANC was banned and labeled a terrorist organization. Most of its leaders had gone underground. Nelson Mandela was on the run. In 1961, inspired by the success of the Cuban Revolution, Mandela, Sisulu, and Slovo founded the armed wing of the ANC called Umkhonto we Sizwe, meaning Spear of the Nation. Mandela, along with 10 other comrades, was arrested and charged with sedition of the government, and with 4 counts of sabotage and conspiracy to violently overthrow the government. Thus would begin one of the most famous trials in South Africa's history, the Rivonia trial. On 12 June 1964, Mandela and his comrades were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Mandela was 46 years old when the sentence was passed. He was sent to the infamous Robben Island, where he would spend the next 18 years of his life. By 1978, the campaign to free Nelson Mandela had gone international. In 1980, a Free Mandela International campaign was launched, which led the UN Security Council to call for his release. In 1982, Nelson Mandela, along with Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, Raymond Malaba, and Andrew Mlangeni, was transferred to Pollsmoor Prison in Tokai, Cape Town. In 1988, Nelson Mandela, recovering from tuberculosis, was transferred to Victor Verster Prison near Paarl. De Klerk's appointment to the presidency changed the entire political situation in South Africa. In February 1990, de Klerk officially legalized all banned political parties, including the ANC, and also announced Mandela's unconditional release. On February 11, 1990, at the age of 72, Nelson Mandela was finally released from prison. After several negotiations between the government and the ANC leadership, South Africa finally became a true democracy. In the general election of 1994, the ANC won comfortably. The newly elected National Assembly elected Nelson Mandela to the presidency. On 10 May 1994, Nelson Mandela was officially sworn in as the first black president of South Africa. Nelson Mandela ensured a smooth transition from white minority rule to a multicultural and multiracial democracy. He saw the importance of peace and reconciliation and wanted to assure the white population that they were safe, protected, and represented in the new democratic South Africa. Therefore, Mandela considered national reconciliation as the primary task of his presidency, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed in order to investigate crimes committed during apartheid by both the government as well as the ANC. In June 1999, Mandela officially stepped down as the president of South Africa and retired from active politics. After retiring from politics, Mandela dedicated his time to working with the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which focused on school construction, rural development, and creating awareness about HIV/AIDS and combating it. On 5 December 2013, Nelson Mandela, aged 95, passed away after suffering from a prolonged respiratory infection. The father of South Africa was no more, and the world mourned his death. The death of Nelson Mandela was not just a great loss to South Africa, but to humanity as a whole. Mandela stood for freedom, liberty, and human rights. He stood for peace and unity. And most of all, he epitomized the image of a selfless and humble leader who represented the cause of humanity. Mandela forgave his enemies, and he pleaded with his people to do the same. He knew and understood that in order for South Africa to move forward, its people must unite regardless of what race they belonged to. He was a lesson in humility, resilience, and strength, a lesson in greatness.